Still waiting for Michael. Melissa knows my dog. A lot of artists are dog people. I'm not opposed to cats, but where is Michael? Michael's got a dog. Lee says Chewy hates blue shoes. I remember, yeah, some shoes, some people's voices. He doesn't like Jim Brown. Jim stepped on his paw one time. Yeah, no need for art talk. Just Chewbacca. Oh, man, where is Michael? Maybe I need to cancel this and start over. $12:58. See, a lot of people are joining. If you have any questions before Michael gets on, you can ask me a question. Okay, it looks like Michael is on. So we'll try to add Michael. Holy smokes, you're here.
I'm here.
I'm here too. I'm at my house.
I'm at mine. I wanted to do it at my studio, but there's not good enough Wi-Fi there.
Yeah, I heard Kathleen and those guys at WeCat are going to be doing they're getting Wi-Fi installed on the 30th.
Maybe I can leech off of theirs.
Yeah, internet in the building's kind of difficult because it's a big old building.
Well, it's all the concrete too.
Yeah. Where's your dog?
My dog's in the other room where the heater is.
Well, I think everybody kind of knows how these interviews are going. I like to do longer interviews. We did get a complaint that the interviews are too long. I kind of disagree.
Then don't watch it. Give me a break.
Right. It was a complaint on YouTube, so you can find a short interview with artists anywhere. I think these longer interviews are important. It's a way to get to know everybody. It's the same reason why and I know you do too, it's the same reason why we do solo exhibitions. It's something that I think is so important. It's the way to get to know an artist. When we do group exhibitions and things like that, you're not going to get to know anything of an artist. You're going to get to know a one-off piece. You're going to get to know very little information from some short examples. So I like to listen to long form interviews. I like to, I like to really get into knowing an artist, but
it's just interesting to be like, yeah, I'm interested in what this person has to say, but not that interested.
Right.
Okay. Stop watching.
But I also, I like to keep it like a conversation. If we just had scripted questions and answers, that's no fun,
Right. And it is kind of weird though, to have an art conversation with you in this context, being that we've been talking about art for almost 15 years together. So it's not like, so I'll kind of answer it as if someone else is asking me these questions and not you, because I know that you know everything that I have to say.
Yeah. Well, I think any of these people that we're going to be interviewing, mostly they're going to start within the building. So I already know them, but yeah, I'm trying to play dumb and act like we don't know each other, but there is a lot I don't know about you, but I know our stories are crossing all the time. So I'm sure there's a lot of stories you might reference or something that, I was there or whatever.
Right. I also say that I'm not feeling particularly sharp today.
Why?
Or this last week. No, just because everything's going on. Like I'm just like my mind's just been not fully on art this last week, but
yeah.
There's that.
Yeah, it's a weird, I kind of got down on art at first, but then we had this idea to do these interviews, and then it kind of got me hyped about art, but I don't know.
I've been in the studio a few days in the last couple weeks, but not as much as I was, just because of, I don't know. It feels like when everything is going on like this, like you'd think you'd be more productive because you have more time.
Yeah.
But then it also feels like not that you just want to give up, but it's like, oh, what's the point? Everything's going to shit.
All right. I just want to remind everybody, use that question mark icon down at the bottom. It's the best way to answer or ask a question for us to answer it. But I see Sarah, which we all know, Sarah Trujillo. You worked with Sarah at Quint Gallery and so on. I mean, there's a long story with that, but she said, can we have a breakdancing story? And I think that kind of gets us, we're going to have a conflict here because I want like a deep story. I want to know the whole thing. So let's get like a real, linear story. Like what, let's hear it from the beginning. That makes sense?
Well, I didn't start taking art serious until much later after high school. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in high school. Like arts, always did art, but art school or that kind of thing never even occurred to me. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that whatever it was going to be, I wouldn't need to go to college for it. And because I hated school, I hated everything about school, couldn't wait to be out of school. So even if art school had occurred to me, which it didn't, it didn't even register that you could go to school for art. It wouldn't have happened anyway. I didn't have the money, didn't have the grades, and had zero desire to do any more school once I was out of high school. I barely even graduated high school.
I'm sorry, did you say where you grew up?
I grew up in Tempe, Arizona. I was born in Iowa, but I grew up in Tempe, Arizona.
Okay.
But so I always did art. When I was in high school, probably around 93, when I was a sophomore in high school, I got really into graffiti. And and all my friends did art too, but it was all illustration based because they were all into graffiti or comic books. So contemporary art or even anything about art history, like just wasn't a part of my life whatsoever, even though myself and everyone I knew was into art. But like I said, it was mostly illustration based. Nothing about history. I didn't know any contemporary artists. I never went to art museums, nothing. It wasn't until around 2004, which was about almost 10 years after I graduated high school, that I started to take art serious. And that was when I moved to San Diego in 2004. For whatever reason, that just kicked me into gear and I just really got into art.
What brought you to San Diego? What was the whole...
Lived in Arizona and hated it most of my life because of the heat. Had friends that lived in San Diego. And at the time, me and our friend Joey, who moved out here together, we were dancers. And we knew friends that were dancers out here in the breaking scene, I guess you could call it. I mean, I didn't break, I was a popper, but. So yeah, moved out here to
another story. I don't even know the difference breaking and popping.
Yeah, that was a whole other life. It was a whole other existence before I got into art.
But you mentioned before too, you guys were part of a hip hop store or something in Phoenix?
Yeah, me and three friends, we had a hip hop store in Tempe, Arizona. It's called the Style Rock Shop. Sold records, clothes, graffiti videos, breaking videos. It was a whole different me.
But it's not, it's the same thing. Like I've seen you guys and I've seen a lot of people that do graffiti. Their style is so important in graffiti. I mainly know more about like early New York kind of graffiti stuff because of the Martha Cooper books and documentaries,
exactly.
stuff like that. And that's kind of when I met you and Joey, I was kind of paying attention to that stuff and I was doing a little bit of stupid illegal graffiti and I would talk to Joey about that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why I connected with you guys, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, speaking of graffiti, I mean, I got into it I did draw letters and that kind of thing before this, but I didn't really, graffiti wasn't really in my periphery. But in 93, which is, I think it was 93, I think it was a sophomore in high school, I got really into graffiti for whatever reason. And yeah, after that, I was mostly into early to mid 80s subway graffiti specifically. I mean, they were doing graffiti in Philly before that, but that era of graffiti was what I was really into. And yeah, I think what you're saying is like that, a legit thing that informs, you know, someone's life. Of course, like anything that we've experienced in our life is going to inform what happens next in our life. So graffiti is definitely that for me. I mean, on that note, I put out I asked people if they had any questions for me before we did this. I got one question, only one. And that was from my friend Dave Swenson, who lives in Iowa, who I met on Instagram. I've never met him in real life, but I met him on Instagram, and he asked me something like, have I always liked vibrant colors, and what's my relationship to color, or something like that. And that goes right into the graffiti. I mean, vibrant colors, to the extent that I am into vibrant colors, and not that I think about it specifically in that way, but it totally comes from graffiti. Because obviously in graffiti, you need that. You need contrast, vibrant colors. I mean, the whole point is to stand out. Mm-hmm. So,
and to be an individual though too, right? Like you can't, if you're copying somebody, it's like, it's blasphemy, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, everyone has their influences. Everybody copies, everybody steals, no matter what you want to think about yourself. We have to do that. That's the only way we really learn. But yeah, especially in hip hop, that's a big no-no. It's called, you know, to bite somebody's style.
Right.
But so that's where I think the vibrant colors come from. I don't think about it in that way now. I mean, the way I think about color now is more like the experience of looking at color. You know, everything's an experience. You look at anything and it's an experience of that thing. But I mean more like relationships between colors and how they interact with each other, and how your eye interacts with seeing those specific colors together is more what I'm interested in now.
I know you've been friends with Saki forever, right? Was he in Phoenix and came to San Diego at that time? Or what was the Saki connection in Phoenix to San Diego? Is he one of the people you knew when you were moving here?
Yeah, he was one of our friends that we knew. And one of the main reasons we moved here is not necessarily because of him, but just because we had a friend connection. So yeah, Saki, San Diego graffiti artist since 1982. He claims he's the first one. Who knows? But definitely him and his friends were one of the first people in San Diego to do it. And he got arrested in the mid-90s and for graffiti, and his mom sent him away basically to Arizona. So when he came out there, that's when we met him. And I've known him, yeah, since about 94, 93. Yeah, and you know, yeah, graffiti was just it was something I took serious for a long time until I got into dancing, and then, but it's always been there. It's still something that I love. You mentioned Martha Cooper's book, Martha Cooper, Henry Chalfant, Subway Art. Yeah, I mean, that's like what we had. That's all we had for a long time until the mid-90s, when there was a ton of graffiti magazines that started coming out. And now it's like you can see anything and everything, which I think is great. Mm-hmm. I mean, I mentioned my friend from Instagram, Dave Swenson, and I've met other people on Instagram and become friendly with them just through text. And that's, you know, even what we're doing right now is one thing it's, people like to hate social media, and that, you know, it has its flaws, but Instagram, I think, is really great for artists. And the only things that I follow on Instagram is artists. There are people that I follow that aren't artists, and I usually just mute their feeds so that I don't see that kind of stuff. I only see art stuff, and you know, it's just I've met probably 3 people that I talk to often that live somewhere else in the world that I would have never known about if it wasn't for Instagram.
Yeah, I know.
I find out about so many other artists that I would have never known about. Sorry to cut you off, but I've done now 3 studio visits with artists that are up in LA. I just contacted them and said, hey, I want to come see your studio. And it's people I'd never met, would have never known about if it wasn't for Instagram. Went up, saw their studios, and I wanted to keep doing that, you know, on a regular basis, just contacting artists that are near me that I've never met and do studio visits with them, because I think it's just a fun thing to do, to visit someone's studio and talk to them about art. But now that all this stuff's going on, I'm not going to be able to do that for a while. But
right, but we can still do like whatever studio visits and stuff like that. But just to get back on some kind of lineage, I remember the first time that I really started seeing you around. I had been working with Joseph Hoopert, your roommate, at the art store. Before it was Blick, it was the art store, and Joey and I were working there, and he was a painter, and he told me about you and you being a painter and stuff, and you guys had this idea to do an art show at the Wonder Bread factory that's near the ballpark. Can you tell us about all of that? I mean, when you did that, it was like groundbreaking for San Diego, for this new generation of artists. That, like, you know, it kicked everybody's ass. You guys had photos in City Beat and like an article, and there was like, you know, there was just a lot of hype at that time, and you were like the new people in town, this younger group of artists, and it was just this moment where all my art friends and everybody, we were like kind of shocked that you guys came on the scene and you took this whole approach of just doing it yourself, you know. And where did that idea come from?
That was, shortly after we moved here in 2004. Like I said, for whatever reason, I had a fire under me for art, and I just wanted to do anything and everything. And I didn't know anything about the quote unquote the art world. I didn't know anything about San Diego art scene. I just thought to myself, we have to have an art show, because we all had this body of work that we wanted to show. And so I just started looking for spaces all around town. And like I said, had zero idea of how to go about anything, just thought we need a space to show this art. And, you know, was totally naive to think that we're gonna show this art, and of course we're gonna sell most of it. Right? Like, of course that's gonna happen. We just need to show it. You know, after looking for a bunch of spaces, ended up finding Bob Sinclair, who owned a bunch of spaces around town, including the Wonder Bread factory. And he rented it to us for a weekend for $1,000. And if the Wonder Bread factory is this huge, early 20th century building that's beautiful. So we had this huge space on the upstairs. The downstairs is just a beautiful space, and printed flyers and did all this promotion for it, just almost out of just pure naivete, because, you know, it was just like, this is what you do. You promote it, you put it up, and then of course you sell it all.
Right.
And we did have, I still say that to this day, and that was in 2005, it's the best attended art show that I've ever been a part of. I mean, over those 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, we probably had, you know, maybe 500-600 people.
It was huge.
And it was kind of set it, you know, it was kind of like a rude awakening for what happened after that, and being met with the amount of apathy after that. But that, yeah, it was a really good experience. And I can't speak to, you know, what other people thought about it or what it was like at the time, but it was definitely a good learning experience to just facilitate the whole thing ourselves, get it all done ourselves, not rely on anyone else. And then that helped us later on, you know, after we met you and Lee, and when we started the first ice gallery in 2010, to just not be afraid to do any of that stuff ourselves.
Yeah. Who was in that first show?
Me, Joey, Saki, and our other friend from Arizona, his name was Paco, who I don't really talk to that much anymore. But and the only I didn't sell anything. Nobody sold anything except for Joey. He had a whole series of paintings that was kind of like a story from the first to the last painting, and he sold the whole thing. But no one else sold anything, and I didn't sell anything for years after that either.
And back then you had, I think all of us were painting on big panels and stuff, but I remember you had large canvases and you were doing these kind of, what did you call them? Aerodecograph?
Yeah, I called it architectural decograph.
Okay.
Like architectural. It was arrows as architecture using subway graffiti and Art Deco.
On canvas.
I did it on canvas because, like I said, I didn't really know shit. So I was just like, you want to make paintings? Paintings go on canvases.
Right.
But it really wasn't the right substrate for what I was trying to do because I was masking and I needed a smooth surface. And so I had to gesso those canvases 3 times, standing in between each one just to get a smooth surface so I could mask on it.
Right.
Later on, I figured out that was the dumb way to do it and went to different substrate.
Is that when you had your first studio? I remember I helped, and I had a studio next to you guys at the Brokers building. What was
that was later. When I was first painting, I was doing it on our kitchen counter in our small little.
Yeah, you and Joey shared an apartment, and I remember he was painting in his bedroom, and you're painting in the kitchen or something.
Yep. And then later on, we got a studio together, and that's in the Brokers building where you had one as well.
Yeah. I had a studio right next to you guys. And I remember I was playing George. I hadn't talked to you that much, but I just remember this moment. I was listening to George Jones on a tape on my boombox while I was drawing and shit in my studio. And you came over, and it was the first conversation that I really remember having with you was about George Jones. And I was like, okay, maybe we have something in common.
It's weird. I don't remember that whatsoever. But that makes sense because George Jones was one of my dad's favorite country singers.
I mean, he's always been one of mine, and that's the first conversation I remember having with you, even though we had studios right next to each other.
Yeah. Well, I was really into music before art. Or not before art, but before I took art serious, I was actually thinking I wanted to be a singer. I sang mostly jazz and blues standards.
Were you singing at that time in Arizona?
I started singing in Arizona a little bit, and then when I got here, I started singing more. I found a piano player I could rehearse with, and did a few singing things. But it wasn't long after doing that, after I had a couple of gigs, that I started to take art more serious, and thought to myself for a while that I wanted to do both, but quickly realized that if you're going to be good at anything, you need 100% focus on that thing, and art was just a bigger pull to me than music.
What were you thinking at the time, like that you were going to just do standards in a jazz club or something, or were you going to do original material? Like, what was the whole idea behind the passion behind wanting to sing in front of people? Or because I
wanted to do both. I mean, I mostly did standards, but I did eventually want to do my own stuff.
I remember you had a gig for a while, right? You did a couple live gigs at some. It was
a place that's not there anymore in Fashion Valley. But yeah, it wasn't long after doing that I realized art is what I really wanted to do. I'm an okay singer. I can carry a tune, but I think I have more to offer as an artist. And there's more creativity in art than music, or at least for me. There's plenty of creativity in music. That's not what I meant. But I just meant that I just felt more of a wide open path when it came to art than it did to music. Like, best case scenario for music, if you're successful, let's say best case scenario is that you're going to be singing the same songs. Like, you're working, but you're going to be singing the same songs over and over for years and years. And let's say you are really successful, dream scenario. You're going to be singing the same songs for fucking just forever.
Yeah.
And you're going to be in, not the best conditions. You're going to be traveling a lot, which I'm not into traveling a lot. But with art, you can it's just you. You only have to rely on yourself, and the possibilities are seemingly infinite.
So kind of after you did the Wonder Bread show and after you had moved here and all that kind of stuff, and we had met, and I remember I don't know where I'm trying to go with this whole conversation, but I know what we called Art Night was a big part of what we were doing at that time too. I don't know if that was before the museum, the Contemporary Museum, or what.
We started before that, and because I didn't start working at MCASD until 2007. And we were definitely doing it maybe a couple of years before that, a year and a half maybe.
So tell us about Art Night. I mean,
I don't know who started it. I came in late, but it was me, you, Joey, Lee, Frida, Nick, and a couple other people that would wander in and out. But every Sunday, as you know, we would meet at a coffee shop and just draw, talk about art. And it was a huge deal. It was so fun. And it was that thing that once a week you could rely on, like every week I'm going to get my fix of like getting my ideas out there or just being around other people that are into the same thing.
Yeah, I think we met every single Sunday at 8 p.m. for like, I think it was like, I want to say 10 years. I could be lying.
It wasn't that long. I think it was like 7 years, but 7 or 8.
Every Sunday. And
every
it was like,
Sunday.
If somebody called in, it was like, you know, like there were so many of us in that core group that were just solid until they moved away. Frida was one of Frida Camus Hawthorne, which I'm probably saying her name wrong. She's in Brooklyn now, but she was one of the people that I would meet with before we started doing the regular group. But Bassam's coffee shop was across the street in the gas lamp from our studios at the Brokers building, and it was open 24 hours or it was open really late. So I think that's why we ended up, meeting, because we were all in the studios at 8 o'clock or whatever, or we were living downtown. And but I think that the story could go so many different directions because two things happened for both of us. We both started working at the Museum of Contemporary Art, and also Ice Gallery started happening at that time.
Well, we started working there in 2007. Ice Gallery wasn't until 2010, but
I started working at MCASD in 2005, and I had a studio with Lee Levy in Ice Gallery before we made it a gallery. So
yeah, but working at the museum was another huge thing as an artist. So there's everyone, like I said earlier, everything we experience in our life, every single thing leads to the next thing and informs that next thing. But some things stand out more than others. Art Night was a first big one as far as art goes. My art life, Art Night was the first big one. The second big one was working at the museum, because I learned so much working at the museum as a preparator. First as a guard, didn't learn much doing that, but then when I was a preparator, along with you and Lee and a couple other people, just learned so much about being an artist, installing other people's work, simple things like learning about what hardware to use, lighting, there are so many things you learn doing that job that I think other artists should know.
Yeah.
That still helps me to this day. I mean, and even doing stuff like Ice Gallery, doing our own gallery, we wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't have all the knowledge we had from 3-4 years of working as a preparator.
Yeah. Amy Parsley was the chief preparator at MCASD for, I think, 16 years. And she's the one that trained both of us in how to handle artwork and how to properly install things and give insight into the entire process. And she is a master. She's somebody that, is so well respected in the museum world.
She was a great boss. She was like the perfect boss. She was very knowledgeable, very patient, and let us do stuff that we probably maybe shouldn't have been doing, sometimes, like you know, operating certain equipment and that kind of thing. But, you know, that's how we learned. And doing those things gave us confidence to do so many other things in our art careers since then. I mean, especially for myself, doing large installations after that, having that experience is what really informed a lot of that.
Yeah, and Amy had a really great inspirational small space in her home called R3, a gallery called R3 that we did a show in, and that was kind of, you know, that was also kind of like this beginning of this group that would become Ice Gallery. But I know at around that time too, the Robert Irwin retrospective happened at MCASD downtown, and that was such a pivotal point for all of us, you know, being on the prep crew at that time.
Yeah, like I said, for a long time, I didn't know much about art. And I didn't start taking it serious till 2004. So by 2007, I still didn't know a ton. And I wasn't that familiar with Robert Irwin until he started installing his show there. Got to help install his show, which was huge, and got to know his work. And our friend Joey, who also worked with us on that and worked at the museum, he was having conversations with Irwin every day because he would see him more than I would whenever Irwin would come in. And Joey would be telling me about this guy and his work and his philosophy on art and that kind of thing, which at the time I wasn't really ready to hear, you know, the sort of site conditional philosophy. I wasn't in that mind state yet. It took me a little bit to get into it. But meeting him was huge, and installing his work, and not just installing it, but while installing it, getting to know more about his process and his philosophy and how he got to what he was doing. And shortly after that, Joey became his first assistant, as you know. And shortly after that, I went and worked at a gallery as a preparator, Quint Gallery. And then a couple of years after that, in 2009, I also started working for Irwin. But yeah, meeting Irwin was the third huge thing that happened. And it wasn't necessarily his work, which I do like most of his work, of course, but it was learning about that site conditional philosophy that was just, it was kind of, I would say that was the path that I was always looking for and didn't know it. Once I found it, I realized, okay, that's what I'm really into, because that site conditional philosophy, the thing I like about art is that there's infinite possibilities. You can do anything you want as an artist.
Yeah.
And so I think that process, that way of working site conditionally is, every single time you do something is guaranteed to be different. If you're presented with a new space or a new site, that space or site has a set of conditions that only that space or site has. So if you're truly working off of that space, then it's guaranteed that whatever you do is going to be completely different than the last thing you did.
Yeah.
And that's what's so great about it.
Right. We do have a question here, and I think it's a good time to segue this whole thing. How did you start ICE?
Well, you started ICE. You and Lee Levy started ICE because that was the building that you were in was an artist studio. And it had been artist studios for years before that. People like Roman DeSalvo and Perry Vasquez was the one that initially called it ICE Gallery. His was an acronym. The ICE was an acronym for something I can't remember.
Institute of Creative Education.
Right, okay.
But yeah, I've heard of that space going back into the early 90s where artists had been there.
Yeah, it was a dump of a building. Yeah, dump of a building that should have been condemned long before it was. But because of that, it was one of the cheapest spaces in town. I mean, it was like 1,200 square feet. And at the time that we had it was like $350 or something. And we split it 4 ways. Mm-hmm. But so you guys had it for a studio for a while, then you decided to turn that front space, which had 2 big 5x8 windows that faced the street, and thought, this might make a good space. But the windows had been covered for years. you took the styrofoam and all the crap that was on one window and opened it up. And when we saw that, we realized, holy shit, this could be a really cool space to show art in.
Yeah, I started renting the additional space just to use as a viewing space for some stuff that I made, these glass pieces that I made. And you guys were coming by, and I live down the street. The space is on 30th and Upus, which the whole block has been demoed and rebuilt. But I was using the space to view some sculptures I made, and I remember this kind of idea of taking over the rest of the space because I was having trouble with some of the tenants. You know, there's probably a lot of people that have bad stories about me kicking people out for not paying rent and stuff like that. But it was a funky time that kind of led to this moment of like, hey, I can afford, or we can all afford this space together. And I remember this moment specifically where I started cleaning up the building. The building leaked like a sieve horribly, and it was kind of the main downfall of the entire situation. But I remember this moment where I started dumping more and more of my own money into that space to try to figure out a way to use it to view work or to show artists' work. And the front door was falling down, horrible front door. Maybe I'll post a picture of the original building later. But I remember I went to Home Depot and I bought a new door, and it was a crappy new door. It was like a cheap new door, but I demoed the frame of the old door and I was putting in the new door, and you came by, you know, and I didn't ask you to or anything. And you were like, what are you doing? And we started talking. Do you remember this?
Vaguely, yeah.
And well, I mean, I don't think we've ever really talked about it much, but it was this moment where you just came by and we were talking, and then it all of a sudden like started this idea of like what would become Ice Gallery. And I remember the very first person that I had asked to do something kind of conditional, because we were all into this new method or this new learned idea. I asked Joey to do the first piece inside the new Ice Gallery, which had the new windows and had been cleaned up and all that kind of stuff. And then started this kind of succession of everybody doing.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it was specifically said at the time, but I think we all just kind of had the thought of like, we've got this space that we can do anything we want in. So we all just kind of did something specific to that space. It wasn't all site conditional, but it was all site specific. And I think the idea was like, we could bring objects and put them in any building. But if you have this opportunity to do whatever you want, then you should use it to do something that's specific to this site, because, you know, we weren't trying to sell anything. We were just trying to put on art shows that could be seen through the window, because it wasn't like a traditional gallery where we had hours or anything. But we did have these two huge windows that anyone walking by day or night could look in the space. So I don't know if we were totally specific about it, but at least my thinking was that if we've got this space, we can do anything. You should do something specific to that site, which then later informed the second Ice Gallery, which is the one that I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years or whatever.
Yeah, and you have you are so good at archiving all that stuff. You always have been. Back when we were doing the original Ice Gallery, you made basically commercials. This is before social media. This was like MySpace kind of shit, I think, you know? You were posting all these commercials on YouTube that were videos for each artist. You were documenting all the shows. So much of that material that's left on all the archive is all this work that you did. So on Ice Gallery SD, there's an archive of those shows.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think everything that I or we had done before that, as far as like taking control of your own situation and just doing it all yourself, those things are huge. And, you know, I think a lot of artists miss that. I mean, a lot of artists not miss it as in they used to, but miss the opportunity to do that when they should take it if they've got it. I always tell any artist, if you can work as a, you know, they call it a technician in other parts of the world, but, you know, a gallery prep or whatever you want to call it, like, that is one of the biggest things that helped me as an artist, is being an art handler.
Yeah, and at that time too, all those solo shows that we did, I think how many did you do in Ice Gallery? You did Studies in Transparency and the
I did too.
okay. And then we all, that core group, we all helped each other
Yeah.
to maneuver and pay for and do whatever it
Yeah,
was
we
possible.
all helped each other financially, paid for each other's shows, and did all the labor for each other's shows. I mean, the first one that I did there, I was not prepared, was freaking out, and totally needed everyone's help, all hands on deck to complete that piece.
Remember lots of sleepless nights in a row, you know, where people did
Yeah,
for days.
and like I said before, we wouldn't have been able to do any of that had we not worked at the museum. I mean, yeah, just knowledge of tools, how to build walls, how to, drywall mud, and, all this kind of thing was directly informed the work that we did later.
Yeah. What else can be said about that moment in time? I mean, we also lost the space, and it was a really horrible moment. And it was right after the group started falling apart. People were moving, people were getting accepted into schools and things like that. So we did a Tom Driscoll show, and that's really this transition point where you started doing everything in the space. You started paying for more things, and you started, I think you were even paying for most of the rent and stuff like that. And
I don't remember. I just know that in 2012, we got evicted because they're going to basically tear down that whole block to build something new, which, was fine. It was a crappy building.
the building had no hope. You know, it was,
No.
it was gonna fall down. It was a disaster, but it was something that made all this stuff happen. It was this incredible available space. So I don't know what can be said about the
Well,
disaster.
the good thing that came out of that is, and the reason that the second ice gallery exists is because we were doing it all ourselves, because we were doing it in this space that had windows that faced the street. There was a person that lived in the neighborhood that saw everything that we were doing, would walk, never came to an opening, but would always see what we were doing through the windows. And then later on, after we got evicted and we were, Ice Gallery was pretty much dead. I kind of looked for spaces for about a month after we left, but couldn't really find anything that was affordable. Plus, no one else really wanted to keep paying for it. They wanted to kind of move on, which I understand. But then we got hit up by James Brown, who's now the owner of, one of the owners of Bread and Salt, where the new Ice Gallery is. We didn't know him. We met him through a mutual friend. They said, hey, this guy wants to meet you and talk to you. We all four went over to the Bread and Salt building. He showed us around the whole building, saying, this is what we're going to do here, this is what we're going to do here.
But this
Super cool old building.
This was to the boarded up Bread and Salt. This was the Bread and Salt that was just,
Yeah, it was. He had just gotten it, and there was nothing going on there yet. So he gave us this whole big tour around this whole 40,000 square foot building, telling us all the stuff that's going to happen. And I remember at the end of the tour being like, I said, like, okay, great. Why are we here?
That's exactly how I remember it going down. And it's still kind of, looking back, because that was years ago now, but I do remember being like, why the hell are we here? Why did you just spend all this time showing us these spaces?
Right.
And then you specifically at the end saying, what's up?
Why are we here? Yeah. And then he's like, oh, I want to know if maybe you guys wanted to keep doing Ice Gallery in this space downstairs. And he showed us this little shitty corner space.
The oldest part of the building.
It wasn't even really a delineated space yet. It was just a corner of that big lobby. And he was like, do you guys want to do it? And I said, yeah. And no one else wanted to keep doing it, which, I totally understand. But I was like, yeah, I want to do it. And it took me a year from that point to build out that space, because like I said, at that point it wasn't really delineated, and it had a lot of machinery and stuff in the way, so it all had to be cleaned up. Walls had to be built. I didn't think it would take as long as it did. It took a year just because of how much money it costs. But started in June of 13, and the first show, which was was in June of 14, and been doing shows, kind of 3 shows a year since then. Except for this last year, it's been pretty sparse.
But to back up a bit, also part of that kind of first meeting with Jim and Isabel, they asked us to do the very first show at Bread and Salt.
Right. We did a show, and again, like, especially for me, who was super into site conditional work, and of course still am, but to be given the opportunity for someone to say, here's this giant 40,000 square foot warehouse, you four pick any spot you want in this building and do whatever you want. I mean, that was a huge opportunity for me. I mean, for all of us. And we ended up doing, I think, a really cool show that was spanned throughout the whole building, upstairs and downstairs. And I don't know, I just think it was a beautiful show.
Yeah, and there's photos, because you archived all that stuff. There's photos on the Ice Gallery SD website. There's a couple questions here. I want to see if let's see what Sarah said. Do you see Instagram as a new site for site conditioned work?
No.
So you're not one of those artists that thinks that the internet's the future of art and all that?
Well, I just mean it's not a place to create site conditioned work. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. I have to think about that. I have to know exactly what you mean by that. But yeah, I mean, in order to make a site conditional work, you need a site that has conditions. I mean, I guess the internet does have its own set of conditions, but I don't know. I have to think about that.
I think we have just under 20 minutes to kind of keep going before it boots us. So is social...
I will say, though, that I do think Instagram specifically is an incredible resource for artists. Like I said, I've met artists and found out about artists' work that I would have never, ever known about if it wasn't for Instagram. And I just think it's a great tool. I mean, some people get, down on social media. It kind of depresses them sometimes. That's why I kind of curate my Instagram to be just art and artists that I like.
Right.
Any other crap that I follow that maybe I kind of have to follow because of friends or family, I don't really even see their stuff. Sorry, certain people, but I mainly just use it for art.
Kari says, is social distancing affecting your work projects in any way? Is there anything on hold? No projects on hold or anything?
Well, yeah, and it's not affecting my work, but the next show at Ice Gallery, which there hasn't been a show there for a while, which is not intentional, just circumstantial. The next show is going to be Tom Driscoll, our friend Tom Driscoll, who he showed there last 5 years ago. And he was going to be the next one. And I was in the process of helping him make a large sculpture because it's the largest one he's ever made. But now that all this stuff's going on, I mean, he's like in his mid-70s. I don't really want to be around him that much just out of safety. So his show is on hold for who knows how long, because even if I could help him make this sculpture and get it done, we can't have an opening. Like, people can't come. So yes, it's affecting in that way. But as far as my own work, no, it's not affecting me. I can go to the studio and be by myself whenever I want.
Yeah. Does your site conditional work inform your flat work or vice versa? How do those work together?
I would say site conditional doesn't affect the work, the flat work. I would say that the idea that the experience that you're going to have looking at any work, whether it's site conditional, flat, or what have you, that experience is what I'm most interested in. So whether something is an installation or whether it's, quote unquote, flat work that I do, I'm most interested in the experience that you're going to have looking at it. So it's not that site conditional informs it. It's more that the idea of something being experiential is what's more important to me when it comes to any art, because that's just how I like to look at art.
Right. I
kind of have put art viewing into two different camps. One is participatory and one is observatory. Nothing's wrong or better about either one. They're just different. So observatory would be, let's just say, like like take a Rembrandt painting or something. That's kind of an observatory experience where you can stand in front of that painting and you get all your information just from standing in one spot. Whereas a participatory experience obviously would be something that you, in order to see everything that that work has to offer, you have to interact with it. You have to move around. You have to see it in your own way. And that's how I prefer to look at art. It's the most fun way to look at art for me. So when I create whatever I create, I have that in mind, that experience in mind.
So right now, I guess that kind of brings us up to date, current ice gallery. You're still working for Robert Irwin and you travel all the time. So what do you do for Bob?
I don't travel a ton, but yeah, I do travel some, and I make all of his fluorescent light pieces. Anything that has to do with the fluorescent light pieces is what I make.
I remember
it's a weird job.
I remember when it all started, and I can't think of anybody else that has such a particular eye. You know, even when Bob could do that stuff, there's no way he would have been fabricating the works with the kind of meticulous perspective that you have.
I think, yeah, it's not a hard task to do. I think a lot of people could do it, I mean, physically, but it does take a certain attention to detail and a certain, like, you have to be a self-starter. Like I work by myself. I have my own studio. I do all his stuff out of my own studio. He doesn't really care when or how I do it as long as it gets done. And so, you know, I'm just by myself. But I do think it does take a certain attention to detail that some people don't have.
We have about 10 minutes. So you have a studio at Bread and Salt, and I've just seen this explosion of production out of your studio in the last year or so, you know, right? You hadn't made works on paper and, you know, since I first met you probably. I don't know what it was, but something happened in the last year where you just produced a ton of work on paper.
It's just circumstance. I mean, if I had my way, I would have site condition opportunities lined up. And if I had a space or a site where I could do something in, you know, and a budget, that's the other thing, I wouldn't be doing any flat work. But because I don't have that and haven't had it for a couple of years, I needed to do something. So I just started doing drawings and paintings in my studio. And then it being on paper was just circumstantial. I didn't have the money to make aluminum panels, which is what I would usually paint on. Paper was available, it was cheap, and I wanted to just get some shit done. So you're still working on panels though, like larger scale. Any paper can only be so big, right? Is that why you go to a panel? Yeah, and it's the different substrates, even though the sort of techniques of making the paintings are the same, the different substrates offer a different viewing experience. I mean, having a 4 foot by 4 foot painting on aluminum, even if you had it on paper the same size, it's just a different, the metal is a more substantial substrate and has a bit more presence in a room than, let's say, a framed work. They're just two different experiences. So I like them both.
Yeah, and at Bread and Salt also we have a mural that is in the back. We call it an alley gallery, where there's revolving mural spaces, and you did I mean, how big is that piece? It's basically like I think
it's 120 feet by, or maybe 140 feet by 20 feet.
It's huge, and
that was my first and only mural, and it was purely just because I wanted to do one because I had never done one, and I asked if I could do it. Was given permission. Of course, I had to pay for most of it myself, but after doing that, realized that I don't really want to do many more murals, at least not myself, because it's, even with that one, Andrew Alcacid helped me a ton.
Right, I remember.
It was still too much work.
Yeah, I remember Andrew Alcacid and Mark Maggs and Melissa Walter. A lot of people helped to make the physical aspects of that mural happen. But yeah, and you guys used an airless sprayer and really high pigment paints and all that kind of stuff. So major work.
Yeah, it still looks good.
It still looks
I think
good.
it's been there 2 years. Like the colors are still nice.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't touch up that well these days because the graffiti sometimes in the way that the paint has faded. But, you know, that's something that happens when you have these works, and that's why every couple of years we paint over them. So, you know, we'll be painting over that one at some point as soon as it starts to look bad. You know?
How much time do we have left?
I would say 7 minutes. I don't know if it's gonna boot us. You know, it might boot us any moment. But
I just have been, you know, for a long time thinking about like why do I like art and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I've come to the reason I love it so much is because unlike other things that are creative, art is the one that truly has no rules. I'm saying rules, it's a semantic thing, but I'm saying it has no rules, no specific parameters for it to be art. You can do anything and everything as an artist, and if you say it's art, then it is art. Anything. Whereas other things that are creative, like music or whatever, I mean, those things have rules. I mean, yes, you can be very expansive within those parameters, but they have parameters. Like, let's say if you're a chef, you know, some people think cooking is an art form. Okay, maybe it is. But in order for something to be food, it has to be edible. I mean, that in itself is a restriction, let's say, in like just creativity in general. Art, though, is the only thing that has no restrictions whatsoever. At least the way that I see it. Also, like, you know, nobody, like, don't roast me for this. These aren't hard and fast rules. These are just the way that I think about it. If you agree with me, great. If I'm not interested in, you know, trying to change people's minds about this, but the way that I look at it is that there's no restrictions to it, and that's what makes it so great. And, you know, it takes this one individual and this one individual's entire life.
we lost Michael. We lost Michael, but I'm going to add him again so we can just finish. That sucks. You were so deep in your thought.
Oh, yeah, it was so deep. Very deep.
Can you save what you were saying?
Keep pontificating? Sure.
Well, I think if we want to keep talking, we can keep talking right now, because now I think there's another hour's worth. So.
Well, I was just saying that idea of no restrictions in art, and that it can be anything, and that and I just love the idea of this one individual. Usually it's an individual. Sometimes it's a collective. Sometimes people collaborate, that kind of thing. But for the most part, art is an individual act, and that individual creating whatever that they create, and that other people then come and look at it and enjoy it, to me is what's so great about it. That when you go to a museum or wherever you're at and you see something that you really love, I mean, I have this thought sometimes. To me, it's amazing that I'm looking at this thing that this one person invented, basically.
Right.
I mean, yes, based on years of art history and all that thing, but because of their specific life experience, everything that they've liked, disliked in their life, all the food that they've eaten, all the places they've traveled, all the people that they've had relationships with, all of those things have informed who they are and what they are at this point. And it is also informed this thing, whatever it is that they've created. And then to look at that and realize, man, it took, of all the billions of people on this earth, it took that one person to create this thing. And I'm looking at it and I'm loving it. Mm-hmm. And it's now informing my life and my life experience and what I will then create in the future. To me, that's what's so great about art. I mean, it sounds silly almost, and it's so simple, but that's just what I love about art. And that's all I was going to say on that topic.
Just looking in the background, I see a lot of work that you have too. How do you feel about collecting or supporting the arts?
I would buy, if I had the money, I would buy so much art. I would be, you know, you worked at galleries and that kind of thing where you see people that kind of like hoard art. They just buy a ton and they can't even display it all because they don't have the room. It ends up like in a warehouse or something. But I have to admit, I would probably be the same way, because whenever I can, I do buy art from, you know, people or friends that, you know, when it's affordable. And I've accumulated a lot of stuff from friends, and half of it, I have to admit, is not being displayed because I don't have the room for it. Right. If I could, though, I would buy a shitload more art. Mm-hmm. I love buying art from people because not only do I like living with it, but I know how important it is to sell a piece of art as an artist, how huge that is, even if it's someone buying something that's not that expensive, because it's not really the money that's so important, which it is. It's just that knowing that you created this thing and this person liked it enough to buy it. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of people that are like, oh, if I could afford it, I'd buy one of your pieces. And they'll say that same thing for years. Yeah. But then this person pulled the trigger, they spent whatever the money is, and they bought it because they just liked it that much. That's beautiful. I love that. And it's cool to make other people feel that same thing, as well as because you actually like the piece.
Right.
So yeah, I've got a lot of art in the house. None of it's mine. As far as like, it's not my own work, it's mine that I bought it, but.
Right. Well, where do we go from here?
I have no idea. I don't know what to talk about. I mean, we could talk about art all day, but.
Yeah. I saw Trista walk behind you a minute ago with Fred.
Trista, yeah, the old lady.
Yeah. Trista has her own Instagram, Sugardale.
Yep, my dame. She's a seamstress and drafts her own patterns for sale at Sugardale.
Maybe we'll do a interview with Trista. She's right behind you. Yeah.
Yep, she and I had a studio for a long time together as well.
Yeah. I think we're done.
Yeah. Probably should have been done a while ago.
Well, what do? You could complain about it. Somebody could complain.
Somebody will.
Well, thanks for being on. And the next person is Melissa Walter tomorrow, Friday, 1 p.m. And then Ponca Saturday, Lee Levy Tuesday, the 31st, Andrew Alcacid, April 1st, Jim Brown is the 2nd. And we're going to keep expanding from there. And
yeah, and you know, like I said earlier, like I wanted to start doing this thing in my life where I just went to new artist studios on a regular basis. I've done it 3 times so far with artists in LA. Just contact them out of the blue and say, hey, I love your work. Can I come do a studio visit? And they've always said yes. And I wanted to keep doing it. You know, that's on hold for probably a few months now, but.
Yeah, and I know you guys just did that. You just took a car ride up. This is like 2 weeks ago or less, right? Before this whole thing happened.
Right before.
You, Max Lofano, Tom Driscoll, who else?
Andrew Alcacid.
Andrew Alcacid. You guys just went and did an impromptu studio visit with strangers that you met on Instagram.
Yeah.
And
I want to do that more often when we're able to again. I like when people come to my studio and we can have like an hour or so to just chat about art. Not so much that I can show them my work, but it's just fun to meet other artists and have those art conversations because, you know, one of the only things that I like to talk about at length is art.
Right, and I think that's why we did Art Night for so long. It was this known moment where everybody can gather and just talk about whatever was coming up at the time, whatever show somebody was in or whatever philosophy somebody wanted to play around with. Or
yeah, I mean, that helps inform someone's practice. The more you can talk about this kind of thing and bounce your ideas off someone else and have them shoot them down or agree with you or add to them, or whatever, it's all a good thing. And I really like that. It's just fun for me is all.
Yeah. Yeah, the art thing is fun.
And I think more artists should do that. I mean, I don't know what it was like in the past. I think about like 60s New York and who knows what it was like, we weren't there. But to me, it seems like this really energetic time for art where everyone was feeding off of each other and everyone had studios kind of in the same vicinity and they were all looking at what each other did and trying to, you know, use that competition to create what they were doing. And I don't really have a lot of that in my life. Maybe it's because we're in a small-ish city. It's not, you know, there's not a lot going on. And I just
it has to do
crave that.
has to do with the availability of space, though. If you're talking about New York 1960s, you know, you had Rauschenberg on a top floor of a loft building, and then, you know, just so many people that were in the same building, and that they were all just kind of living around each other, going to the same coffee shops and all that kind of stuff. What's that artist's name? I cannot remember his name, who lived below Rauschenberg.
I don't remember. I'm not good with names and
This
dates.
is so dumb. Somebody help me. He did that dumb American flag painting.
Jasper Johns.
That guy. Whatever. I'm supposed to be like this art person, and I can't remember the name.
But yeah, I mean, I like community in that sense. I'm not interested in like collaborating with artists or that kind of thing because I like my art practice being a very individual thing. But I do like an art community. I like meeting with other people to talk about art because, like I said, that's one of the only things I like to talk about at length is art.
Yeah. In my own defense, I've installed a solo Jasper Johns exhibition. I know who Jasper Johns is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm horrible with names. I don't remember any. If people ask me like, who are some artists you like right now? I probably wouldn't even be able to name it. I'm just so awful with names.
Yeah, well, it's crazy, you know, especially with art where, you know, you have in our brains, we try to download a visual. I work so much better with visuals than names and things like that. But especially with artists, it's like you have like a ton of information in your brain that you can kind of cross-reference imagery and names and all that kind of stuff. But who are some artists that you like? Who are some artists that have influenced you?
Didn't I just say that I couldn't remember their names? Influence is hard to say. I mean, you know, there's been a ton that have influenced me.
Let's do the top 5 because we've done that before.
Right, and I'm trying to think of the top 5 that I have said in the past, but I think the top 5 for me, this is just favorite artists, not necessarily direct influence.
We had this list.
Right. And my top 5 is just favorite artists, not necessarily direct influence, because I think those are separate things. But the top 5, I think, are Donald Judd, Robert Irwin, John McLaughlin, Louise Nevelson. I can't remember a 5th one.
Fred Sandback.
Fred Sandback. Jesus Christ, of course. Those are my top 5.
If you haven't heard of Fred Sandback, you know.
Seeing Fred Sandback for the first time at Dia Beacon, I mean, I was told about it beforehand. Joey had seen it before me and told me how great it was. But seeing it in person, that was another like huge thing. Like, man, what you can accomplish with such an economy of material.
Lee said, "Spill the influence beans." There's this quote: "The secret to creativity is being able to hide your influences."
I don't know. I don't really process influences totally consciously. Sometimes on purpose. Like sometimes something is so good by an artist that I really like that I almost don't even want to look at it because it could make its way in there.
Yeah, and I've felt like that a lot of times. I mean, I've been so obsessed with so many artists, but Fred Sandback for sure was one of them. I remember the first time seeing a Fred Sandback in person. I was with you and Lee Levy. We were in LA. I've installed Fred Sandbacks before, but the first time that I had seen one in the wild, you know, we were going around a corner, and I remember this moment where we were about to go around a corner, and Lee turned around to me and he said, "It's a Fred Sandback." And I hadn't seen it yet. And so he absolutely, I'm going to throw him under the bus, he ruined that moment.
I remember that being a Donald Judd, though.
No, it was a Fred Sandback.
Okay. I remember that moment. I think we were at LACMA.
Yeah, I mean, just so let's talk about that moment where it's so, you know, seeing a work for the first time, you know.
Well, yeah, it's kind of what I was saying earlier as far as you know, an experience of seeing something. And part of that experience for me is coming upon something that I didn't know existed, had no reference for, coming upon it totally clean and just being amazed by it in whatever experiential way that might be. And so, yeah, for me, it comes down to even when I'm in museums or whatever, like I don't like to be herded in a way, and I don't like to be told how to view something. I don't want someone to tell me what I'm going to see. I want to just discover it on my own. And if it's too much work to do it, I won't do it. So, for example, like I think I was at the Guggenheim, and there was a Terrell exhibit. This was before he did his huge one, where he had to enter through one door and exit through another. What's that?
My phone's gonna die.
Oh, well, in that exhibit, what?
I'm gonna get a charger. You can keep talking.
In that exhibit, there was an entrance and an exit, which I didn't think of it that way, but I started to go towards it. I started to go through the exit, which I didn't know it was. And the guard said to me, actually, the entrance is over here. You're supposed to walk through it this way. I just didn't even go in. I don't want to be told how to view art. Like if you tell me you have to go this way in order to see it, then you've already like telegraphed to me how I'm supposed to look at it. I want to look at it in my own way. And that's kind of something I try to keep in mind. This is weird to talk while you're doing this, but that's something I try to keep in mind with the stuff that I do as well. Like I don't want to dictate to someone. I don't want to telegraph to someone how they should view it. Not specifically, at least. If I want someone to enter a certain way or view it in a certain way, I may have that in mind, but I'm going to do it subtly to where you might not know that that's how I'm directing you to see it. Because ultimately, I want you to see it in your own way, because that's how I like to see things. I don't want to tell you what it's supposed to be. I don't want to tell you the entire process of what it took to make it. I want you to make that up on your own, because to me, that's a more enjoyable viewing experience.
Can you hear me with my phone plugged in?
Yeah.
It's weird because it wasn't doing that the other day. Chewy just woke up.
Oh my God.
One story Melissa says, like the guard at the Tony DeLapp show.
Oh yeah, we were at the Tony DeLapp show and at the Laguna Art Museum. And I can't remember, but there's always, at museums, there's always a guard that's like, wants to be a gallery guide. When really what they should do is fucking just stand there and don't say anything. But he's trying to like, yeah, tell me, like directing me to like, stand over here and look at it like this. You know, when he created this, he was thinking this, this, and this, which he was totally wrong about for one.
Right.
But it's like, man, don't tell me that. Because, you know, a lot of times I might not want to know why the artist did something.
Yeah, Kiko just mentioned or at Phenomenal. You know, I think during that Phenomenal exhibition, which was all over Southern California and everything, you had these experiences where these guards were in the same exhibition for months, you know, and they became these kind of impromptu tour guides for good and bad, mostly for bad. You know, they would kind of, they were kind of priming people. People are commenting some funny stuff. Yeah, these individuals priming somebody before they see it. You know, it's always been a problem.
That shows a perfect example. I mean, the whole point of the show, phenomenological, experiential, like, don't tell me how to view this thing. Like, I'm supposed to see this in my own way. That's the whole point of this work, is to not dictate to you how you're supposed to look at it.
Yeah. That's something I love so much about Doug Wheeler. When we got to work on his exhibition for Phenomenal, the space, you know, he didn't want a primer, and it's something that influenced me. He just wanted somebody to walk into the space. You know, he didn't want you to take your shoes off at that moment. Some pieces he has, you know, you have to put on booties or something to protect the surface, but
yeah, and that's too much for me even sometimes. Like if I have to put on booties over my shoes at a museum, I'm already like, I don't even want to go in. This is like, it's taking me out of this moment. I want to be able to just discover something on my own terms.
Yeah. I remember this moment though, when we were installing this particular Doug Wheeler piece. We had to stretch a scrim ceiling, and the rest of the crew at MCASD had to go. We couldn't get them to work, and the only people I knew to call were you and Joey. And there's photos on your Instagram of us doing this like all night scrim installation in the ceiling. That was just this incredible experience, and getting to work with Doug and experience all that kind of stuff was pretty incredible.
Yeah, and that, to me, that's you say you didn't want a primer on, basically telegraphing to everyone what this all entails and what you're looking at. I feel the same way where, I don't even really like wall text,
right?
At least for my own stuff. I don't want anything like that, really. I don't mind telling someone the philosophy behind why something is created, but I don't want to tell you the process of creating it, and I don't want to give you any reason why I did, because to me it's more enjoyable if that person discovers it on their own. Akiko asked something. What did she ask?
Do you think your attraction to participatory work overlaps with the embodiment of dance?
Not consciously, but like I was saying earlier, I mean, anything that I've experienced in my life has informed the next thing that's happened. So, not consciously, no. But I see what you're getting at.
Well, maybe it's time to end it. Do you want to keep talking here or what?
We could talk about art all day.
I know. I don't know if we
have. Especially if people had questions.
There's no more questions unless,
then.
Well, I'm going to take a look at this whole video and maybe I'll upload the whole thing, or maybe we'll just keep it short. But thanks for doing it.
Yeah, no problem. I don't know if it was interesting at all, but
I think it was. I enjoyed it, and if people don't want to watch a long interview, don't watch it. Akiko says, I asked because I was into graph before playing sports and the body relationship was similar.
I mean, yeah, that's they are both participatory for sure, but I don't know. Me dancing was such a whole other life for me that I'm so detached from it now. I think people that know me now would never expect that I used to dance, but I did do it for like 5 years. No, they're not directly related, but they are related in the sense that everything in our life, it informs the next thing. And I don't mean that in a like new agey kind of way. I just mean it on a very practical, like everything you've experienced in your life, there's no choice but for it to inform the next thing that happens. So,
well, let's end it at that.
All right. As my mom, just as my mom's commenting. Hi, Mom.
Yeah, your mom said, I think it's very interesting, and you know how much knowledge, and you know how much knowledge I have. I love listening to your views. Oh, okay. I see what she's saying. I butchered reading that. Cool.
All right.
All right. Well, talk to you later.
Peace.
Bye-bye.